So I wanted to demonstrate some kind of basic, easy tips that can help with the painting and the layering. And so right here you can see I have a first layer. It is a hot mess, like it's not really anything. There was a lot of intention and words in there. But it's also kind of muddy. It actually looks lighter on the video than it does in real life. And that's okay because we're going to paint over it. And you can add white to just about any color to paint over it. So I'm picking a color. It's this kind of what I call peacock blue, but it's actually called in Dick Blick bright aqua green because it'll stand out here. And I am just going to, I kind of see the nose of the owl right there. So let's see, I hadn't really decide what kind of owl, but since it's a horizontal owl. So one of the things that I want to mention is that you can paint pretty lightly and with not too much paint on your brush so that the paint dries really quickly. Okay, so that's the first thing, is I'm painting very lightly and just outlining. Okay, now once I have my outline, I like to let it dry, and often my next step, rather than going into the actual design like the owl, is to do the background. So I just put a white, red, and yellow on my palette because oranges will stand out in this owl. I'm dipping my brush in the water and then drying it off as much as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the background first. And a lot of times I see that people are painting the background. Okay, and so they're kind of going around like this. You can paint over. Now it's nice to let all these layers dry in between, but you can paint over your outlines so that your outlines get thinner. But then what it can look like too is like there's this stripe. And so once I outline the background, like I'm going with the grain, like I wouldn't paint this way into a line that's like this. I would paint in that same direction, kind of like going with the grain. And then I'm going to blend out. And I do that with my brush, or I do it with my finger. I love painting with my fingers. And see how the texture that's underneath is coming up? Okay, so it's kind of a big chunk. So I'm going to blend this. Okay, so you can see that the outline and this background layer are very light. And if I have a dark background like I've been having, let me change this a little bit. Outlining it with white like this, and then even with this still, the white still wet, because white blends with anything, I can go in, maybe even leaving some of that white coming through, but I can go in with brighter colors, go right over the white, because this mucky underlayer is already dry, and then again kind of blend out from the outline. And again, this is just one way to paint. This isn't like the way to paint. This is one way to paint. But what I seem to have developed over the last 23 years is a painting technique and style that's just accessible and will give you a really good chance at being happy especially as a beginner, someone who hasn't painted as much. Because, for example, the mind's eye is an unconscious thing. And so if it gets confused at all, it's like, oh, I don't know, I can't even see what I'm doing. And by painting very deliberately up to the edges of your design and then letting it be loose in the center spaces, this nice line makes your mind's eye happy. And so you can see what it is you're doing. If you can't see what it is you're painting, it can get overwhelming, right? If you're confused, if your mind's eye is confused, you're going to be confused. So now let me kind of paint in the owl here a little bit. I'm just mixing a little of this blue with the white. So again, I'm going to go along the edge and see how lightly I'm painting. There's not that much paint on the brush, and I'm also painting lightly so that I pick up this texture. And I'm going to go around again, kind of the outline, and then blend either with my paintbrush, whoops, or my finger. Because I love all the different stuff going on in this bottom layer, right? And I'm going to paint, like, I think until the eyes are really defined, the owls look like zombies. So maybe I paint in the eyes. So I think the biggest tips I'm giving in this lesson are, one, to not worry at all about a muddy underlayer, but let it dry. I like to have multiple paintings going at once just so I have the patience to let one dry. And then two, once you start painting in, paint lightly, like with a light touch, so that your outlines can dry and this layer that you're putting down dries really quickly. You're picking up on the texture. I'm just kind of using the paints I have out here. If you need a color to cover your underlayer more, you can add a little bit of white. You see how this yellow is pretty translucent? But that's okay. If you ever can't see anything, like this beak, I kind of feel like we want more beak. We'll make the beak bigger. Or if the paint's wet, you can scratch in. Oh yeah, I so love scratching in. Let's do a little of that. Even if it gets painted over, I love the texture. Okay. So, I also want to just, with all these feathers, again, let's just see what colors we're getting here. You can paint over your outlines a little bit. And you're painting lightly. You're going kind of with the green. Letting some of that first layer come through. Not covering up. I like to leave a little of each layer. And when you have a nice dark background like this, you can actually, we'll see, it just kind of happens when it happens. But I like leaving, like letting some of this dark be kind of a secondary outline, like maybe, or we can scrape. And then, which it doesn't seem like anyone's had any trouble with this, is you just keep adding colors. Like your owls, you guys' owls are super fun and interesting to look at. But it's just layers and layers. And there doesn't have to be a rush, right? It's not a race. And we can add and add and add and get whimsical. Okay, what if I put this down nice and thick? And then scrape. And those colors are showing through. All right. See, you try things. If they don't work, it's no big deal. So see, I'm looking at this being like, ooh, that's pretty ugly. But we'll let it dry and we'll layer over and it'll be perfect. Okay, so hopefully that helps. And I think painting lightly, letting the colors dry in between, like seeing how light this is. It's when you paint thick and then you keep painting over and over, and it just gets hard to just be patient, and it gets hard to see what it is you're doing. And as soon as your mind's eye gets confused, the rest of you gets confused, and you know, we don't like to be confused. We like clarity, right, Mr. Owl? Miss Owl? Can we get stripes in here that show through? Oh yeah. Fun. Okay, so that is our painting demo.